Welcome! In this series of videos, we will look at software add-ons for the PowerBasic Windows compiler. Today we will look further at using the MyLittleGrid custom grid without the use of SQL Tools or SQL Server to speed up your application development. At the end of the last video, we had created two applications. The first application was to allow the configuration of the MyLittleGrids, and the second application was an application which used a MyLittleGrid. Normally the configuration of these grids is held within a SQL Server database. However, a method of accessing the SQL Server database uses SQL Tools. Now SQL Tools is a purchased library, and unless you have purchased this library, you would not be able to compile and run the code. So in order to allow you to be able to run the code in a standalone fashion, I have prepared a new library. At the end of the last video, we demonstrated the use of this library to allow you to configure your application without having to use either SQL Tools or SQL Server. Now this was an early beta of this library, and there were a few bugs in it. I've now done some more work on the library to work out the bugs, and that's what we're going to look at today. So if we have a look at the configuration application, when it launches, it will display a MyLittleGrid on the screen and a selection of drop-down lists to allow you to pick the application you wish to configure. So if we're looking at the MyLittleGrid demo, we pick the application, we pick the form within the application, the grid within the form, and the tab within the grid. We have two tabs on this grid, a data tab and a departments tab. If we pick the data tab and hit the search button, it gives us a list of the columns which will be displayed in this grid. As I said earlier, normally with these applications, this data is stored in a SQL Server database to keep it outside the application so that it can be configured quite independently of the application itself. However, we're storing this configuration information in a series of flat files which we'll have a look at in a moment. Each of the column names is actually named here, as in the column name column is the name the user gets to see in the top of the grid. The grid position is the column position number within the grid. The result name is the name you will actually use in your code to refer to that particular column. This allows you to refer to in your code to a non-changing column name, but as far as the user is concerned, the name of the column can change during the lifetime of the application. We also have the column width, how wide you wish the column to be, whether the column is actually hidden or visible, and the color of the data within the column. There are also a number of other configuration options you can do in the columns, but we'll cover them as we come to them. So if we have a look at the actual application itself in our sample application folder, this is our MyLittleGrid demo exe. If we launch that, it will display on the screen a grid containing data. This data is coming from a flat text file, but the configuration of the grid itself, which would normally come from a SQL Server database, is coming from another flat text file. However, from the point of view of the user and the point of view of prototyping an application, this is a very quick way of throwing an application together without needing to have a SQL Server database at all. So this is displaying 2000 data records on the screen, and we have configured them to be mostly left justified, the city column being centered in the column, and we have a tick box for active. Each of these fields is currently read-only, with the exception of the department. With the department, we allow the user to pick from a drop-down list. So what if we want to add an extra column to this? Let's look at the static data files first of all. In our sample application folder, there's a cdef config folder. In the cdef config folder is a list of configuration files. Each of these configuration files defines one part of the grid. Each of the files that start with the cdef prefix are files which define the look of the grid. The files at the bottom of the list are the files which define the data which exists within the list. For example, if we look at the user list config file, we'll see that this is a pipe delimited list of the columns which appear on the screen inside the grid, whereas the cdef files are configuration for the grid itself. If we look at the Get All Applications, this gives you a list of all the applications that these particular files are actually set up to configure for. The configuration application itself and our My Little Grid demo. So if we wish to demonstrate to our user that we can quite easily add extra features to the grid without having to change the application, let's add two new items. Let's add a new column first of all. The new column we're going to be calling Skill, to allow the users to be able to record the fact that individual users have acquired some new skill. So if we exit our application and go back to our configuration, we select the tab we're going to make amendments to, and we're going to add a new field called Skills. We'll make the field slightly narrower, we will make it visible, we will unlock the column so it's editable, and we will tick the column checkbox. Secondly, we're going to allow our user to click on the surname field and display a drill down box. This can be quite easily done by setting one of the other configuration options. So for our surname field, if we scroll to the right, we will see there is a column user button tick box. If we tick that, and if we save our changes, and then we go into our application, we will see we indeed do have a new skills column, which is tickable. And if we click on the surname field, we will see that once you click on the field, a small box appears. This drill down button will allow you, in your own code within the application, to execute anything you wish. This could be a link to a separate form, or perform some other function in the background. But the act of displaying the drill down box is done entirely in the configuration, without any changes to the application whatsoever. So what this configuration utility will do for you, it will allow you to define a grid. And on that grid, you can have a number of tabs. You can define many grids within an application. And by the simple act of taking a USB drive with you, you can demonstrate to a user how all this can be set up. You can talk through with the user and prototype the application, all without your development environment or SQL Server or SQL Tools. And at the end of the session, you will have gathered a requirement from the user that can be used to start off your development. In our next video, we're going to be showing you how you can detect the fact that an individual row has actually been updated and highlight it on screen. But that's it for today. Thank you for watching.